The day started like any other for Marcus Johnson, a bright and energetic 14-year-old from Chicago. He had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. His grandmother lived in Los Angeles, and every summer Marcus would visit her. It was something he always enjoyed, spending time with Grandma, exploring the city, and eating her famous homemade cookies. But today wasn't just about visiting family. It was also his first solo flight. Sure, he'd flown before, but those times were with his mom or dad. This time he was flying alone, and that made him feel older, more responsible. Marcus arrived at O'Hare International Airport early, carrying his small backpack filled with snacks, a book, and his headphones. He loved music. It helped him relax when things got stressful. And airports could sometimes be overwhelming, even for someone as confident as Marcus. The terminal buzzed with activity, families rushing to catch their flights, business people typing furiously on laptops, and kids running around despite their parents' pleas to slow down. Marcus checked in, went through security without any issues, and made his way to Gate 27, where his plane was scheduled to depart. As he waited, Marcus observed the people around him. There was a group of college students laughing loudly, probably heading somewhere fun for spring break. A businessman sat nearby, scrolling through emails on his phone while sipping coffee. An elderly couple held hands, whispering softly to each other. Everything seemed normal. Nothing hinted at what was about to happen. When boarding began, Marcus followed the line onto the plane. He found his seat, a window seat near the middle of the cabin, and settled in. Next to him sat an older woman wearing large sunglasses and reading a magazine. She glanced at Marcus briefly but didn't say anything. That was fine with him. He preferred keeping to himself anyway. Once seated, he pulled out his headphones and adjusted them carefully so they wouldn't get tangled. Then, he placed his backpack under the seat in front of him, making sure everything was secure according to the airline's rules. The plane hadn't taken off yet, and passengers were still getting settled. Some were stowing carry-on bags overhead, while others flipped through magazines or scrolled on their phones. Marcus leaned back slightly, trying to get comfortable. He liked watching planes taxi on the runway. It reminded him of how big the world was, and how many places there were to explore. As the engines roared to life, signaling the final preparations for takeoff, Marcus felt excitement bubbling inside him. Just a few hours, and he'd be in sunny California. But then, something unexpected happened. Laura Whitmore, one of the air hostesses assigned to this section of the plane, walked down the aisle performing her pre-flight checks. She stopped near Marcus's row, glancing at the boy adjusting his headphones. At first, nothing unusual occurred. But moments later, she approached him with a stern expression. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her tone cutting through the hum of conversations around them. "What are you doing?" Marcus froze, surprised by the sudden question. "I'm just fixing my headphones," he replied politely, showing her the cord in his hands. "They got tangled." Laura didn't seem satisfied. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him closely. "Are you sure that's all?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Because I saw you messing with your bag too." Marcus blinked, confused. "No, ma'am, I already put my bag away, see?" He pointed to the space beneath the seat in front of him, where his backpack rested neatly. "Everything's packed." For a moment, Laura hesitated. Other passengers nearby turned their heads, curious about the exchange. One man 2 rows ahead raised an eyebrow, while a mother sitting across the aisle gave Marcus a sympathetic look. Still, Laura pressed on. "Well, you need to stop touching your things," she insisted. "You're distracting everyone." By now, Marcus was starting to feel uneasy. He hadn't done anything wrong, and yet here was this air hostess accusing him of causing trouble. He tried explaining again, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "Ma'am, I promise I'm not doing anything bad. I'm just getting ready for takeoff." Unfortunately, Laura wasn't listening anymore. Instead, she called over another crew member and whispered something to them. Within minutes, the situation escalated. 2 security officers appeared at the front of the cabin, walking briskly toward Marcus's seat. Passengers craned their necks to see what was happening, murmuring among themselves. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to come with us," one of the officers said firmly, addressing Marcus. His heart sank. "Why? What did I do?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's protocol," the officer replied. "We've received a report that you were behaving suspiciously." Suspiciously? Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Suspicious behavior. All he'd done was adjust his headphones and make sure his bag was properly stored. How could that possibly be considered suspicious? Despite protests from some passengers who witnessed the interaction, Marcus knew arguing wouldn't help. Reluctantly, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. As he walked down the aisle, escorted by the officers, he noticed the older woman next to him shaking her head disapprovingly. Others whispered quietly, some expressing disbelief, others offering words of encouragement. Once off the plane, Marcus was led to a private area where airport staff questioned him further. They searched his backpack, finding nothing more than snacks, a water bottle, and a paperback novel. Eventually, they allowed him to call his mother, Angela Johnson, who rushed to the airport upon hearing the news. By the time she arrived, tears streaming down her face, Marcus was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally too. That night, back home, Marcus replayed the events in his mind over and over again. Why had Laura singled him out? Was it because he was young, or was it because he was black? Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that what happened wasn't fair, and deep down he knew he couldn't let it go unanswered. Little did Marcus know this incident would spark a chain reaction far beyond anything he could have imagined. That night, as Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He replayed the scene on the plane over and over again. Laura's sharp tone, the accusing stares from the other passengers, the security officers, escorting him off the aircraft like he'd done something wrong. It wasn't just the humiliation that gnawed at him, it was the injustice of it all. He hadn't broken any rules or caused trouble. All he'd wanted was to sit quietly and enjoy his flight. Yet here he was, treated like a criminal simply because someone decided to see him that way. The next morning, Marcus woke up feeling heavy-hearted but determined. His mom, Angela Johnson, could tell her son wasn't himself. She sat down with him at the kitchen table, placing a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Marcus," she said gently, "you don't deserve what happened yesterday. No one does, but we can't let this go unanswered." Marcus nodded slowly, picking at his food. "I know, Mom, but what can I do? They already kicked me off the plane. What's done is done." Angela leaned forward, her eyes filled with resolve. "Not exactly. People need to know what happened. Not just for you, but for others who might face the same thing. We have to speak up." With that, Angela grabbed her phone and opened the camera app. She turned to Marcus and asked if he felt comfortable sharing his story online. At first, Marcus hesitated. He didn't love the idea of being in the spotlight, especially after everything he'd been through. But then he thought about it. If no one spoke out, nothing would change. Taking a deep breath, he agreed. Sitting on the couch in their living room, Marcus recounted the entire incident while Angela recorded him. He spoke clearly and calmly, explaining how Laura had accused him of causing trouble when he was doing nothing more than adjusting his headphones. He described the security officers coming to escort him off the plane and the looks of disbelief from the other passengers. As he talked, his voice grew stronger, fueled by a mix of frustration and determination. When he finished, Angela hugged him tightly. "You did great, sweetheart. Now let's show the world what really happened." Later that evening, Angela uploaded the video to social media, adding a caption that read, "This is my son, Marcus. Yesterday he was racially profiled and removed from a flight for absolutely no reason. This isn't just about him. It's about every child who faces discrimination because of the color of their skin. Please share his story so we can demand justice." Within hours, the video began to gain traction. Friends and family were the first to comment, expressing outrage and support. Then came strangers, people who had seen the post shared by mutual connections or stumbled upon it through hashtags like Stand with Marcus and racial justice. By midnight, the video had thousands of views. By morning, it had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Reporters reached out to Angela, asking for interviews. Local TV stations aired clips of Marcus speaking about his experience, while national networks featured segments discussing racial bias in the airline industry. Journalists highlighted the fact that Marcus wasn't the first person to be targeted this way. Stories of similar incidents poured in from across the country. Black travelers being questioned for sitting in the wrong seat, Middle Eastern, passengers detained for speaking Arabic, Latinx families separated during routine checks. The pattern was clear. Systemic racism was alive and well in aviation. As the story spread, public opinion shifted dramatically. Social media users rallied behind Marcus, flooding the airline's official accounts with complaints. Hashtags like "Just Boycott Skyair," the fictional name of the airline, trended nationwide. Customers canceled flights, vowing not to fly with the company until meaningful action was taken. Celebrities joined the conversation, amplifying Marcus's message to their millions of followers. Even politicians weighed in, calling for investigations into discriminatory practices within the airline industry. Meanwhile, Laura Whitmore, the air hostess involved in the incident, found herself at the center of a firestorm. Someone leaked her full name and workplace online, and soon her social media profiles were flooded with angry messages. Some defended her, arguing that she was just doing her job, and suggesting that Marcus must have done something to provoke her. But these voices were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of criticism. Memes mocking her behavior circulated widely, and petitions calling for her termination garnered tens of thousands of signatures. The airline scrambled to respond to the backlash. They issued a statement apologizing for the unfortunate incident and promising to investigate further. However, many viewed the apology as insincere, a generic attempt to placate the public without addressing the root issue. Critics pointed out that the statement failed to mention Marcus by name or acknowledge the role race may have played in the situation. To make matters worse, screenshots surfaced showing past complaints against Laura Whitmore for rude behavior toward minority passengers. These revelations only fueled the growing outrage. For Marcus, watching the fallout unfold was both empowering and overwhelming. On one hand, he was grateful for the support he received. Messages of encouragement poured in from people around the world, thanking him for having the courage to speak out. Teachers emailed Angela, saying they planned to use Marcus's story as a teaching moment in their classrooms. Community leaders invited him to speak at events, eager to hear directly from the boy whose bravery had sparked such an important conversation. On the other hand, the sudden attention took its toll. Strangers recognized him in public, stopping him to offer hugs or words of praise. While most interactions were positive, some made him uncomfortable. A few reporters showed up uninvited at his house, hoping to get an exclusive interview. Online trolls left cruel comments beneath the video, questioning whether Marcus's account was truthful or accusing him of exaggerating for attention. Through it all, Angela remained steadfast, shielding her son from negativity whenever possible, and reminding him why they were doing this, to fight for fairness and equality. Despite the challenges, Marcus refused to back down. He realized that his story had struck a nerve because it resonated with so many people. For every hateful comment, there were dozens of uplifting ones. For every skeptic, there was someone willing to listen and learn. And for every injustice Marcus faced, there was a community ready to stand beside him. By the end of the week, the momentum showed no signs of slowing. Protesters gathered outside Skyair headquarters, holding signs that read, "Stop racial profiling" and "Justice for Marcus." Lawyers specializing in civil rights cases offered their services pro bono, eager to help hold the airline accountable. Discussions about diversity training and policy reform dominated headlines, forcing companies across industries to examine their own practices. Through it all, Marcus stayed focused on the bigger picture. Yes, he wanted answers, and yes, he deserved an apology. But more than anything, he hoped his experience would lead to real change. He dreamed of a future where kids like him could board planes without fear of judgment, where employees were trained to treat everyone with respect regardless of their race or background. If sharing his story could bring the world closer to that reality, then every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt would be worth it. As the days passed, Marcus began to feel a shift, not just in society, but within himself. The shy teenager who had once doubted his ability to make a difference was now a symbol of resilience and hope. Little did he know, the journey was far from over. The next chapter awaited, and it promised to test his courage even further. With the whirlwind of attention still swirling around him, Marcus knew he couldn't let the momentum fade. He had accomplished something remarkable by bringing his story to light, but he also understood that awareness alone wasn't enough. Real change required action, bold, deliberate steps that would hold people accountable and push institutions to do better. Sitting at the kitchen table with his mom one evening, Marcus began brainstorming ideas for what came next. Angela listened intently as her son poured out his thoughts. "Mom," he said earnestly, "what if we could make them listen? Not just say sorry or promise to look into it, but actually do something about this." Angela smiled proudly. She loved seeing Marcus take charge, especially after everything he'd been through. "That's a great idea, Marcus, but how do you think we can make sure they hear us?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking hard. Then an idea struck him, a plan so bold and unexpected that it made his heart race. "What if I go straight to the top?" he asked. "Like, talk to the CEO or something?" Angela raised an eyebrow. "You mean confront Richard Langley, the head of Skyair? That's not going to be easy, sweetheart. CEOs don't usually meet with regular folks like us." "But maybe they should," Marcus replied firmly. "If he's running the company, shouldn't he know exactly what's happening on his planes? Maybe if he hears my story directly, from me, he'll understand why things need to change." Intrigued by the idea, Angela encouraged Marcus to explore it further. Together, they reached out to a local lawyer named Ms. Harper, who specialized in discrimination cases. Ms. Harper was already familiar with Marcus's situation because she'd been following the news closely. When Angela explained their plan, Ms. Harper nodded thoughtfully. "It's risky," she admitted, "but it could work. If you can get face-to-face with Langley, you might have a real chance to make an impact. The key is preparation. You'll need evidence, witnesses, and a strategy to keep the conversation focused on solutions, not excuses." Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into planning. With Ms. Harper's guidance, he drafted a list of demands. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, stricter oversight of complaints involving discrimination, and transparent investigations into incidents like his. He also wanted the airline to publicly acknowledge its role in perpetuating racial profiling and commit to measurable improvements. To strengthen his case, Marcus enlisted the help of his best friend, Jamal, who had a knack for technology. Jamal suggested creating a presentation using video clips, statistics, and testimonials from others who had faced similar discrimination. "We'll show them that this isn't just your story, it's everyone's story," Jamal said confidently. Working late into the night, Jamal pieced together footage from Marcus's viral video, interviews with passengers who had witnessed the incident, and data on racial bias in aviation. The result was a powerful slideshow that highlighted the systemic nature of the problem, while keeping Marcus's personal experience front and center. As preparations continued, Marcus learned about an upcoming industry conference where Richard Langley was scheduled to speak. It was a high-profile event attended by top executives, journalists, and policymakers, all the right people to amplify Marcus's message. Excited by the opportunity, Marcus convinced his mom and Ms. Harper to attend the conference with him. They bought tickets under the guise of being regular attendees, knowing they'd only have one shot to make their move. The day before the conference, Marcus rehearsed tirelessly. He practiced his speech in front of the mirror, timing himself, to ensure he stayed within the allotted Q&A period. He memorized key points from the presentation and prepared responses to potential objections. Despite his nerves, Marcus felt ready. This wasn't just about revenge or proving a point, it was about justice, fairness, and making sure no one else had to endure what he did. On the morning of the conference, Marcus dressed in his sharpest, outfit: a navy blue blazer, crisp white shirt, and neatly pressed slacks. As he looked in the mirror, he reminded himself of why he was doing this. "You've got this," Angela told him, giving him a reassuring hug. "Just remember, you're not alone." When they arrived at the venue, Marcus was awestruck by the scale of the event. The auditorium was packed with hundreds of attendees, many dressed in business attire. Giant screens displayed the Sky Air logo alongside slogans like "Fly Higher" and "Connecting Worlds." On stage, Richard Langley delivered his keynote address, speaking enthusiastically about innovation and customer satisfaction. To Marcus, it felt surreal. Here was the man responsible for the airline's policies, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the audience. During the Q&A session, Marcus's heart pounded as he raised his hand. His palms were sweaty and his throat felt dry, but he forced himself to stay calm. Finally, a staff member approached him with a microphone. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stood up, clutching the device tightly. All eyes turned toward him as he began to speak. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. "I'm 14 years old, and last week I was removed from a Sky Air flight because an air hostess accused me of causing trouble when I was doing nothing wrong. I want to share my story today because it's not just about me. It's about the countless others who face discrimination every day in the skies." The room fell silent as Marcus launched into his presentation, projecting Jamal's slideshow onto the giant screen behind him. The images spoke for themselves: footage of Laura Whitmore's aggressive behavior, charts showing disparities in how passengers of different races were treated, and quotes from victims of racial profiling. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the truth unfolded before their eyes. When Marcus finished, he turned to Richard Langley, who sat frozen in his seat. "Mr. Langley," Marcus continued, "how can your company claim to value diversity when employees like Laura Whitmore treat young black boys like criminals? What are you going to do to fix this?" For a moment, Langley seemed lost for words. Then, clearing his throat, he attempted to respond. "Thank you for sharing your perspective, young man. We take these matters very seriously and will certainly look into—" But Marcus cut him off. "Looking into it isn't enough," he said firmly. "People are watching. They want to see action. Will you commit to mandatory anti-bias training for your staff? Will you investigate every complaint thoroughly and transparently? Or will you continue to ignore the problem until someone else gets hurt?" The audience erupted in applause, cheering for Marcus's courage and conviction. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, snapping photos and jotting down notes. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly heard, not just by one person but by an entire room full of influential figures. As the conference ended, Marcus stepped outside, overwhelmed but exhilarated. He had done it. He had taken a stand, spoken truth to power, and demanded accountability. Now all that remained was to see whether Richard Langley and Sky Air would rise to the occasion or crumble under the weight of public pressure. Either way, Marcus knew he had ignited a spark that couldn't be extinguished. The moment Marcus stepped outside the conference hall, he felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and an undeniable sense of accomplishment. He had faced one of the most powerful men in the airline industry and held his ground. But as the initial adrenaline wore off, reality began to sink in. What would happen next? Would Richard Langley actually follow through on Marcus's demands? Or would the CEO dismiss the entire confrontation as a fleeting PR headache? Inside the auditorium, chaos erupted after Marcus's bold intervention. Journalists swarmed Richard Langley, bombarding him with questions about the incident and pressing him for answers. Cameras flashed relentlessly as reporters shouted over each other. "Mr. Langley, how do you respond to Marcus Johnson's accusations? Will Sky Air implement mandatory anti-bias training? What steps are you taking to address racial profiling within your company?" Langley, visibly flustered, tried to regain control of the situation. He called for calm, raising his hands in a gesture meant to signal patience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice strained but measured, "I appreciate the concerns raised today. Let me assure you that we take these allegations very seriously. We will conduct a thorough review of this matter and explore ways to improve our policies. But Marcus's words echoed in everyone's minds. Looking into it isn't enough. The audience hadn't forgotten the teenager's challenge, and neither had the media. Reporters zeroed in on Langley's vague promises, pointing out that similar assurances had been made in the past, with little to show for them. One particularly persistent journalist pushed harder. "Sir, does this mean you're committing to specific changes, such as mandatory anti-bias training or transparent investigations? Or are we looking at another empty promise?" Langley hesitated before answering. "We'll consider all options," he replied cautiously. "Our goal is to ensure every passenger feels safe and respected when flying with us." Though polite, his response lacked conviction. It was clear that Langley hadn't anticipated the intensity of Marcus's presentation or the scrutiny it would bring. As the press conference dragged on, Langley grew increasingly defensive, struggling to deflect criticism while maintaining his composure. By the end of the session, even some of his own employees looked uneasy, whispering among themselves about the growing backlash. Meanwhile, outside the venue, Marcus found himself surrounded by supporters. Strangers approached him, shaking his hand and thanking him for speaking out. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others simply offered words of encouragement. A few reporters managed to catch up with him, asking how he felt about confronting Richard Langley directly. "I'm just glad I got the chance to tell my story," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind around him. "This isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. If Sky Air really cares about its passengers, they'll prove it by taking action." His words resonated deeply, not only with those present, but also with millions watching online. Clips of Marcus's speech and Langley's awkward responses went viral almost instantly. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Sky Air Accountability, reigniting calls for accountability. Celebrities, activists, and politicians joined the chorus, amplifying Marcus's message and urging Sky Air to act decisively. Back at headquarters, Richard Langley faced mounting pressure from all sides. His executive team gathered for an emergency meeting to discuss the fallout. Board members expressed concern about the potential financial impact of the scandal, citing plummeting stock prices and widespread boycott threats. Public relations experts warned that failing to address the issue head-on could irreparably damage the company's reputation. "We can't afford to ignore this," one board member said bluntly. "People are watching. If we don't take meaningful action, we risk losing customers and credibility." Another chimed in, "And let's not forget the legal implications. That kid has lawyers backing him up. If we drag our feet, we could be hit with lawsuits left and right." Faced with these stark realities, Langley reluctantly agreed to implement sweeping reforms. Within 48 hours, Sky Air issued a new statement announcing several key initiatives: mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, the establishment of an independent oversight committee to investigate discrimination complaints, and the launch of a nationwide campaign promoting inclusivity in air travel. Additionally, Laura Whitmore, the air hostess involved in Marcus's incident, was fired, with the company citing her behavior as inconsistent with their values. While many celebrated these developments, others remained skeptical. Critics argued that the measures were reactive rather than proactive, designed to quell public outrage rather than address systemic issues. Some pointed out that similar promises had been made in the past, only to fizzle out once the spotlight faded. For Marcus, however, the reforms represented progress, even if incomplete. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but he also knew the fight wasn't over. In the days that followed, Marcus became a household name. Invitations poured in from organizations eager to hear him speak. Schools invited him to share his story with students, emphasizing the importance of standing up against injustice. Community centers hosted events where Marcus discussed the power of resilience and advocacy. Even lawmakers reached out, asking him to testify at hearings focused on combating discrimination in transportation industries. Through it all, Marcus stayed humble, reminding himself why he had started this journey in the first place. "It's not about me," he often said during interviews. "It's about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of who they are. My hope is that, by speaking out, I can help create a world where people are judged by their actions, not their appearance." Laura Whitmore, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life. Her termination made headlines, sparking debates about accountability versus forgiveness. While some sympathized with her, arguing that she was a product of flawed systems, others viewed her dismissal as long overdue. Unable to find work in aviation due to the controversy, Laura retreated from public life, reportedly seeking counseling to process the backlash she had endured. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Marcus's courage continued to spread. Inspired by his example, travelers began documenting and reporting instances of discrimination more frequently, holding airlines accountable for their actions. Advocacy groups launched campaigns aimed at educating both employees and passengers about racial bias, using Marcus's story as a cornerstone of their efforts. Slowly but surely, conversations about equity and inclusion became part of mainstream discourse, not just in aviation, but across industries. For Marcus, the journey transformed him in ways he never expected. Once a shy teenager content to blend into the background, he now stood confidently at podiums, addressing crowds of hundreds. He learned to navigate the complexities of activism, balancing optimism with realism. Most importantly, he discovered the strength of his own voice, a tool capable of inspiring change far beyond what he'd imagined. Yet, as proud as he was of what he'd accomplished, Marcus understood that true equality required ongoing effort. The reforms at Sky Air were a step in the right direction, but they weren't the finish line. There was still work to be done, to hold institutions accountable, to educate future generations, and to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, could travel without fear of judgment or mistreatment. As he prepared for yet another speaking engagement, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come. From the humiliation of being kicked off a plane to confronting a CEO on a national stage, he had turned pain into purpose. And though challenges lay ahead, he faced them with unwavering determination, knowing that his voice mattered and that together, people could build a better, fairer world. The weeks following Marcus's confrontation with Richard Langley brought a whirlwind of change, not just for Sky Air, but for the entire aviation industry. The reforms announced by the airline were met with cautious optimism as people waited to see whether the company would follow through on its promises. For Marcus, this period was both exhilarating and exhausting. His days were filled with interviews, speaking engagements, and meetings with advocacy groups. Yet amidst the chaos, he remained focused on ensuring that the momentum didn't fade. Sky Air wasted no time implementing the changes it had pledged. Within a month, all employees, from air hostesses to ground staff, were required to attend mandatory anti-bias training sessions. These workshops were designed not only to educate workers about racial sensitivity, but also to challenge implicit biases they might not even realize they held. Facilitators used real-life scenarios, including Marcus's experience, to illustrate how seemingly small actions could have devastating consequences. Employees who resisted or failed to complete the training faced disciplinary action, sending a clear message: tolerance for discrimination would no longer be tolerated. In addition to the training, Sky Air established an independent oversight committee tasked with investigating complaints of discrimination. This panel included experts in civil rights law, psychology, and diversity management, along with representatives from marginalized communities. Their job was to review every reported incident thoroughly and recommend corrective measures. To ensure transparency, the airline published quarterly reports detailing the number of complaints received, the outcomes of investigations, and the steps taken to address systemic issues. For the first time, passengers felt like their voices mattered, and that accountability was possible. The campaign promoting inclusivity in air travel also gained traction quickly. Advertisements featuring diverse travelers appeared on billboards, television screens, and social media platforms. Narrated by Marcus himself, One particularly impactful commercial opened with him recounting his story before transitioning into scenes of families, couples, and solo travelers boarding planes together. "Flying should bring us closer, not divide us," Marcus said in the ad. "At Sky Air, we're committed to making sure everyone feels welcome." The slogan, "Fly Together," became synonymous with the airline's new mission. While these efforts earned praise from many quarters, not everyone was satisfied. Critics argued that the reforms were superficial, pointing out that true change required addressing deeper structural inequalities within the industry. Some questioned whether Sky Air's initiatives were genuine or merely a PR strategy to salvage its damaged reputation. Others noted that similar programs had been implemented by other companies in the past, with mixed results at best. Despite the skepticism, there was undeniable progress. Passengers reported feeling more comfortable reporting incidents of bias, knowing their concerns would be taken seriously. Advocacy groups lauded Sky Air for setting a precedent, urging other airlines to adopt similar policies. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift, not just within Sky Air but across the entire sector. For Laura Whitmore, the fallout was far less forgiving. After her termination, she struggled to find employment in aviation. Airlines, wary of public backlash, refused to hire her, citing her involvement in the scandal. Desperate for work, she eventually took a job as a cashier at a local grocery store, a far cry from her previous career. Friends and family distanced themselves, unable to reconcile her actions with the person they thought they knew. Isolated and ashamed, Laura sought therapy to cope with the overwhelming guilt and anger she felt. While some sympathized with her plight, arguing that she deserved a second chance, others saw her predicament as poetic justice. As the dust settled, Marcus found himself reflecting on the broader impact of his journey. He realized that his story had resonated because it tapped into something universal, the desire for fairness and respect. It wasn't just about him. It was about every traveler who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their accent, or their appearance. By sharing his experience, Marcus had given a voice to countless others who had remained silent for fear of repercussions. One day, while scrolling through social media, Marcus stumbled upon a post from a woman named Sarah Thompson. She recounted how she'd been racially profiled during a flight 2 years earlier, but hadn't spoken up because she didn't think anyone would believe her. Inspired by Marcus's courage, she decided to file a formal complaint with the airline involved. "Thank you, Marcus," she wrote. "You showed me that my voice matters too." Messages like Sarah's reminded Marcus why he had started this journey in the first place. They fueled his determination to keep pushing for change, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. He often thought about the advice Ms. Harper, his lawyer, had given him early on. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step forward counts. Marcus's growing influence extended beyond aviation. Schools invited him to speak at assemblies where he encouraged students to stand up against injustice and use their voices for good. Community centers hosted workshops based on his story, teaching young people how to advocate for themselves and others. Even politicians took notice, drafting legislation aimed at combating discrimination in public spaces. One proposed bill, nicknamed the Marcus Act, sought to establish federal guidelines for handling complaints of racial profiling in transportation industries. Through it all, Marcus stayed grounded, leaning on his mom and close friends for support. Angela Johnson watched her son transform from a shy teenager into a confident advocate, marveling at his resilience. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus," she told him one evening as they sat together on the couch. "You've done something incredible, not just for yourself but for so many others." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," Marcus replied, smiling. "And I'm not done yet." Indeed, Marcus had bigger dreams for the future. He envisioned creating a foundation dedicated to fighting discrimination in all forms, not just in aviation, but in schools, workplaces, and communities. The foundation would provide resources for victims of bias, fund research on systemic racism, and partner with organizations working toward equality. With the help of donors inspired by his story, Marcus hoped to turn this vision into reality. As months passed, The initial fervor surrounding Marcus's case began to wane. News cycles moved on, and public attention shifted to other pressing issues. But Marcus understood that lasting change required persistence, not fleeting enthusiasm. He continued speaking out, attending conferences, and collaborating with activists to keep the conversation alive. Each time he stepped onto a stage or sat down for an interview, he reminded himself of the responsibility he carried, to honor those who had shared their stories with him and to inspire others to join the fight for justice. By the end of the year, Marcus's efforts had yielded tangible results. Sky Air's reform served as a model for other airlines, prompting widespread adoption of anti-bias training and transparent complaint procedures. Travelers reported feeling safer and more respected, knowing that mechanisms existed to hold companies accountable. Meanwhile, Marcus's foundation gained momentum, attracting support from celebrities, corporations, and grassroots organizations alike. Looking back on everything he'd accomplished, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for the strangers who had rallied behind him, for the mentors who had guided him, and for the strength he'd discovered within himself. He knew the battle against discrimination was far from over, but he also knew that progress was possible, one courageous act at a time. As he prepared for his next adventure, a trip to Washington, D.C., to meet with lawmakers advocating for the Marcus Act, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The boy who had once been humiliated on a plane now stood as a symbol of hope and resilience. And though challenges lay ahead, Marcus faced them with unwavering determination, knowing that his journey was just beginning. Months had passed since Marcus's confrontation with Richard Langley, and life had settled into a new rhythm. Yet the changes he had sparked continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what he could have imagined. For Marcus, this chapter of his journey was less about fighting battles and more about celebrating victories, both big and small. It was also about looking ahead, dreaming bigger, and preparing for the challenges that still lay on the horizon. The trip to Washington just marked a significant milestone. Marcus arrived at the Capitol building alongside Angela, Ms. Harper, and a team of advocates who had championed his cause from the beginning. They were there to meet with lawmakers pushing for the Marcus Act, a bill designed to establish federal standards for addressing racial profiling in public transportation. The legislation sought to create uniform protocols for investigating complaints, mandate diversity training for employees, and allocate funding for research on systemic bias. As Marcus walked through the halls of Congress, surrounded by towering marble columns and historic portraits, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was the same place where decisions affecting millions of lives were made every day. And now, at just 14 years old, he was part of that process. Lawmakers greeted him warmly, shaking his hand and thanking him for his courage. One senator even remarked, "You've reminded us all why we're here, to make things better for everyone." During the meeting, Marcus shared his story once again, this time with an audience of legislators and policy experts. He spoke passionately about the need for accountability and transparency, emphasizing that laws alone weren't enough unless they were enforced fairly. "It's not just about punishing bad behavior," he said. "It's about creating systems that prevent it from happening in the first place." His words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement and murmurs of support. By the end of the session, several lawmakers pledged to prioritize the bill, vowing to see it through to passage. While the fight for legislative change continued, Marcus turned his attention to another dream: launching his foundation. With donations pouring in from supporters around the world, he officially established the Marcus Johnson Foundation for Equality and Justice. Its mission was simple yet powerful: to empower individuals facing discrimination and to educate communities about the importance of inclusivity. The foundation offered free workshops, legal resources, and mentorship programs for young activists eager to make a difference. It also partnered with schools, businesses, and nonprofits to promote anti-bias initiatives and foster dialogue about race and equity. One of the foundation's earliest projects was a nationwide essay contest for students aged 10 to 18. Participants were invited to write about their experiences with discrimination or share ideas for building a more inclusive society. The response was overwhelming, with thousands of entries flooding in from across the country. Reading through the essays, Marcus was struck by the raw honesty and creativity of the submissions. Some recounted painful encounters with prejudice, while others proposed innovative solutions like peer-led anti-bullying campaigns or community art projects celebrating diversity. Selecting winners proved difficult, but Marcus found joy in recognizing voices that deserved to be heard. The foundation quickly became a beacon of hope for many. Parents reached out to thank Marcus for providing a platform where their children could express themselves without fear of judgment. Teachers incorporated its resources into their lesson plans, using real-life examples to teach empathy and resilience. Even corporations began reaching out, seeking guidance on how to implement inclusive practices within their organizations. Through it all, Marcus remained humble, reminding himself that the work was never truly his alone. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness and equality. Back home, Marcus balanced his activism with schoolwork and family life. His classmates looked up to him, often asking for advice on how to handle difficult situations or stand up for what was right. Teachers praised him not only for his academic achievements, but also for his leadership skills. At home, Angela marveled at how much her son had grown, not just in confidence but in wisdom. "You're becoming such a remarkable young man," she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch. "I'm so proud of the person you're becoming." Despite the accolades, Marcus faced moments of doubt. There were days when the weight of responsibility felt heavy, when he wondered if he was doing enough or if the changes he'd inspired would last. On those days, he leaned on his support system, his mom, his friends, and the countless strangers whose stories reminded him why he kept going. He reminded himself that progress wasn't linear, setbacks were inevitable, but perseverance was key. One particularly meaningful moment came during a visit to Los Angeles, where Marcus finally reunited with his grandmother. She had followed his journey closely, cheering him on from afar, but seeing him in person brought tears to her eyes. Over homemade cookies and lemonade, she listened intently as he recounted everything that had happened, the protests, the reforms, the speeches. When he finished, she smiled knowingly. "You've always had a strong heart, Marcus," she said. "Now the whole world sees it too." By the end of the year, Marcus's story had become a symbol of resilience and hope. Documentaries featured him as a changemaker, highlighting how one teenager's courage could spark a movement. Schools included his name in lessons about civil rights, drawing parallels between his efforts and those of historical figures like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. Awards rolled in, from humanitarian honors to scholarships earmarked for future leaders. Yet none of these accolades compared to the gratitude expressed by individuals whose lives he had touched. One letter stood out among the hundreds Marcus received. Written by a young girl named Mia, it began simply, "Dear Marcus, thank you for showing me that I'm not alone." Mia explained how she had been bullied at school for being biracial, feeling invisible until she heard Marcus speak. Inspired by his bravery, she decided to join her school's diversity club and start conversations about acceptance. "Now I know I can make a difference too," she wrote. "Because of you, I believe in myself." Reading Mia's words filled Marcus with renewed purpose. He realized that his journey wasn't just about fixing broken systems or holding people accountable. It was about inspiring others to find their own strength. Every child who felt empowered to speak up, every adult who learned to listen, and every community that embraced diversity brought them closer to the world Marcus envisioned. The new year approached. Marcus reflected on how far he'd come. From the boy humiliated on a plane to the teenager honored at award ceremonies, he had traveled a long road. But he knew the journey wasn't over. Discrimination still existed, in airports, classrooms, workplaces, and neighborhoods. The work of dismantling prejudice required constant vigilance and collective effort, and Marcus was ready to keep leading the charge. On New Year's Eve, Marcus stood on the balcony of his apartment, gazing at the city skyline illuminated by fireworks. Beside him, Angela wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "The future," Marcus replied, a smile spreading across his face. "There's so much more to do, so many more voices to lift up, but I think we're heading in the right direction." Angela squeezed his shoulder. "We are, and no matter what happens, remember, you've already made the world a better place." Marcus nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. The scars of the past would always remain, reminders of the pain he'd endured, but they were also testaments to his resilience, proof that adversity could be transformed into strength. As the clock struck midnight and cheers erupted below, Marcus whispered, to himself, "Here's to tomorrow, and to all the tomorrows after that." For Marcus Johnson, the sky was no longer a limit. It was a promise, a vast expanse of possibilities waiting to be explored. And with each step forward, he carried the hopes and dreams of countless others, proving that even the smallest voice could ignite a revolution.